Somalia is on the edge of an economic collapse, but according to Hodan Osman, the president of the Somali Development and Reconstruction Bank, the reason is simple. She says it all started when one man made a decision: Donald Trump. Under his administration, the United States stopped sending aid to Somalia, and for the first time in over 40 years, the lifeline was cut. For decades, Washington had poured money into Mogadishu, an average of $450 million every single year over the last decade, billions in total. Money meant to rebuild, to stabilize, to give hope. But now that the tap has run dry, Somalia is in crisis. The question is, what happened to all that money? If billions kept coming in, why isn't Somalia self-reliant by now? Why is it still struggling to function as a nation? Did foreign aid truly help? Or did it quietly trap Somalia in a cycle of dependency? Today, we unpack the truth behind Somalia's economic meltdown, a story about power, politics, and the price of foreign aid. When Donald Trump walked into the White House in 2017, he came with a mission: to rewrite America's deals with the world. One of his first orders: end every international agreement he believed was draining American taxpayers. And at the top of that list was foreign aid. Almost overnight, Trump froze billions of dollars meant for struggling nations. Agencies that had shaped U.S. diplomacy for decades were suddenly under fire. USAID shut down. Funding for the World Health Organization slashed. Even the International Organization for Climate Change caught in the storm. The world watched in shock. For more than half a century, the United States had been the biggest financial lifeline for dozens of countries. Now, that lifeline was gone. Trump called it America First. But for many nations, it felt like abandonment, and nowhere would the impact be more devastating than in Somalia. When the news broke, analysts warned Africa would be the hardest hit. After all, most of America's foreign aid flowed to the continent, and while many dismissed that prediction, in some countries, the impact was undeniable, especially in Somalia. At the Financial Times Africa Summit in London, the president of the Somali Development and Reconstruction Bank, Hodan Osman, broke her silence. She revealed that the shutdown of U.S. aid had shaken Somalia's fragile economy to its core. The sudden loss of U.S. support, she said, sent shockwaves through the nation's financial system. Trade slowed, public spending shrank, and government revenues, especially from sales taxes, began to collapse. We didn't expect the aid cuts to echo this far, she admitted, but they did, and the results were devastating. Just a year earlier, the United States had poured over $1 billion into Somalia's economy, with another billion expected in 2025. All of that vanished overnight. The country that had once relied on foreign aid to stay afloat was now learning what life looked like without it. But it's not just the government's budget or revenue that has been affected. You see, U.S. aid once provided 65% of Somalia's foreign aid, according to Dr. Abdulkani Sheikh Omar, the former Director General of the Ministry of Health and now a government advisor. Thanks to the aid, centers specially created to treat Somalians who can't afford to pay were operational. But given the fact that U.S. aid has been dismantled, dozens of centers that once treated the hungry are closed. These centers were a very crucial part of Somalia's healthcare system as it continues to wrestle with decades of insecurity. As of June 2025, Save the Children, the largest non-governmental provider of health and nutrition services to children in Somalia, said the lives of 55,000 children were at risk if it shut down 121 nutrition centers it could no longer fund. Sadly, it has indeed shut down. The healthcare system in Somalia seems to be the most affected. The Suka Zulaha Center for Mothers and Children, a hospital in southern Somalia, ceased operations. The hospital's closure, which involved locking its front gate and terminating staff, including doctors and midwives, was a direct consequence of funding cuts from the United States. According to The Times, the Trump administration's decision to cut aid resulted in the loss of funds that covered salaries and medical supplies for the facility. Khadija Ali, 25, arrived at the hospital a few days after its closure, unaware of the situation. She had traveled from a camp for displaced people outside the city to the hospital that offered free maternal care. She desperately pounded on the door, crying and expressing her fear of death if she could not deliver her child inside. Unable to go elsewhere due to the advanced stage of labor and lacking money for other options, Ali began giving birth outside the hospital. Neighbors, awakened by the commotion, brought her into their home, where she delivered a healthy baby girl. When news of Ali's difficult midnight birth quickly circulated among the hospital's laid-off staff, nurse midwife Khadija Noor Adan was disturbed by the story and decided she could no longer stay home while women were forced to give birth in the street. Her colleagues felt the same way, and they decided to open the hospital again. "Now it is time to work for the community," she said. "Despite the fact we have no salary, we feel a responsibility to come to work." Even without getting paid, the hospital staff, doctors, counselors, cleaners, and the pharmacist managed to get the facility back up and running just days after the news got out. The government-run medical center, located near a livestock market on the outskirts of Baidoa, has really struggled since an extra 770,000 people, displaced by drought and war, moved into makeshift camps around town. Even though it's technically a government hospital, it completely depended on foreign aid for staff and equipment, like most other health facilities in the country. While officials could theoretically open their doors again and welcome staff back, they can't because of the lack of outside support. Now, what can we pick from all this? Firstly, foreign aid is not beneficial to any country. Yes, it may seem like the opposite, but it's not. Some people may see how Somalia is suffering without foreign aid. But let's take a minute to analyze it. For almost a decade, Somalia received nothing less than $450 million on average from the US alone. If you put together all the aid it receives from other countries, the total amount of aid received by Somalia every year should be over $2 billion annually. Now, Somalia has a population of less than 20 million people with a very young population. Like most African countries, Somalia is blessed with mineral resources including uranium, iron ore, oil and gas, and gypsum. But most of these resources are still unexplored, although recent reports suggest that some exploration activity has begun. However, despite this country is the third poorest country in the world. This can be attributed to several causes, including famine, as geography and topography of Somalia makes it vulnerable to natural disasters, including droughts, famine, floods, and cyclones. But most importantly, it has to do with the long-standing insecurity in the country. The insecurity began after rebels overthrew the Somali military leader Mohammed Siad Barre. The rebels drove Barre from Mogadishu in January 1991, and since then, no central government re-emerged to take the place of the overthrown government. Given a lack of unified power, the country descended into chaos, and a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions began to unfold. In the mid-2000s, Islamic extremist groups, notably the Islamic Courts Union, emerged and gained control over large parts of the country. In 2006, the Islamic Courts Union was overthrown by Ethiopian forces who supported the transitional federal government. However, in 2007, Al-Shabaab militant group rose to power, controlling large areas, and is currently engaged in a long-term conflict with Somalia's government and allied forces. Now, in the midst of all this, the international community, including the US, have tried to send bathed military and humanitarian aid to Somalia. However, despite the help of the US military strength, the Al-Shabaab militant group continues to launch attacks and control large swaths of territory. But that's a topic for another day. The point we are trying to make is that since the crisis began, Somalia has been receiving aid from the US. Even when the country managed to get a kind of functional government, aid still formed a large part of their budget. Now, despite this aid, the country is still very, very poor. The economy is bad, and the majority of the people live in IDP camps depending on aid to eat. What did this do? It made Somalia dependent on aid. Instead of the people and the government to figure out how to survive on their own, they are dependent on aid. Instead of the government using aid to build functional socio-economic infrastructure like good healthcare, they depend on foreign donors to run the majority of their hospitals. Imagine living a vital part of the economy on the goodwill of foreigners. Isn't that dumb? And now that US aid has been shut down, the president of the Somali Development and Reconstruction Bank, Hodan Osman, didn't even have any iota of shame in saying that the country is in a crisis because the US decided to cut down aid. Imagine if Somalia had not been overly reliant on forged aid. Imagine if it had become self-sufficient. Let's even ask a very important question. What did the government of Somalia use the aid they have been receiving? There is no doubt that most of it went into the pockets of those greedy Somalian leaders. We know this because it has become a norm in Africa. Most of the aid intended for development and poverty alleviation ends up in the pockets of corrupt leaders and their cronies. The cycle of looting has become an institutionalized plague, depriving millions of Africans of the much-needed benefits that such funding is meant to provide. Then the question arises, should the U.S. continue providing financial assistance to Africa under such conditions? Instead of ensuring that these resources reach the people who need them most, corrupt government officials, bureaucrats, and elites siphon off large portions of the funds, enriching themselves while leaving the masses in abject poverty. Transparency, international and other anti-corruption watchdogs have repeatedly exposed shocking cases of embezzlement, with some African leaders stashing stolen funds in offshore accounts or investing in luxurious properties abroad. For instance, several African countries receive millions of dollars annually from USAID to fight diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS. However, reports have shown that funds meant for purchasing medical equipment and drugs are often mismanaged or embezzled, leading to a lack of essential medicines in public hospitals. The Marxist dictatorship of Ethiopia's Mengistu Haile Mariam was a major recipient of donor funds, a portion of which was used to forcibly resettle large segments of the population. Donor funds, which were earmarked for famine relief, were instead used to buy trucks for the resettlement scheme. Relief aid was also intentionally kept away from some of the most severely affected areas because it suited Mengistu's regime to starve its opponents. But Ethiopia is not the exception. The Congo also sold donated food supplies and used the funds to purchase an arms factory from Italy. The more peaceful Mauritius took donated rice, which it insisted be of high quality, and diverted it to tourist hotels. And what about most recently, in Nigeria, where during the COVID-19 pandemic, palliative, which was meant to be given to the citizens, were hoarded and instead shared by politicians with people who would vote for them. When there's a drought in a region of Kenya, corrupt Kenyan politicians would immediately cry out to the international community for help. This call would reach the ears of the United Nations World Food Program, which would respond by sending several thousands of tons of corn to Kenya. But instead of the corn going to the citizens of Kenya who need it, a portion of it would go directly into the hands of unscrupulous politicians who then pass it on to their own tribe to boost their next election campaign. Another portion of the corn produce would end up on the black market where the corn is dumped at extremely low prices. Then just a few of them would go to the citizens. It's why, despite the billions of aid sent in every year, nothing changes. It's why Somalia has remained poor. It's why the country is currently in an economic and health crisis. But the question is, can Somalia survive without foreign aid? The answer is yes. Just look out how the healthcare workers in that hospital decided to work together to offer healthcare services to people even without pay. This right here is how a nation is built. The fact is that Africa cannot be built by handouts or foreign aid. It has to be built by the sweat and work of Africans themselves. We have said it over and over again. Aid has done more harm than good to Africa. It has made Africa to be seen as a helpless continent that cannot do anything to help itself. But it's time to change this. Africa can do without foreign aid. If there was no aid, Africa would be forced to find ways to create revenue by itself. It would force Africa to produce and trade with fellow African countries. It would force Africa to improve on infrastructures. When there is no free food that will be sold at low prices, farmers will have to go to the farm. Africa will not fizzle out without aid. Instead, Africa will come out stronger. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and share.